Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here. I just went through the exhibit earlier, and it's remarkable. Um, so I am so privileged to introduce Alice. I had the incredible honor and privilege of working with her on this novel when we flew away. In this book, Alice explores the life of Anne Frank in the years between the Nazi invasion of the Netherlands and the day the Frank family goes into hiding. Of course, we all know that Anne's story has a tragic ending, but in Alice's hands, as she captures Anne's wit and humor, her inner life and her dreams for the future, her vulnerability and streaks of stubbornness and jealousy, and above all, her marvelous effervescence and courage, we, the readers, are steered towards hope and defiance, love and joy, despite the lurking shadows of a most horrific evil. Alice, the author of such masterpieces as The World That We Knew, The Dove Keepers, Practical Magic, and so many others, has been called the reigning queen of magical realism. She has a knack for crafting luminous stories. Her extraordinary mastery of the written word, coupled with captivating accounts of love and heartbreak, fairy tale imagery and dreamy symbolism, remarkable female characters, and the magic of the ordinary, allows readers to lose themselves in the written page. With her book, When We Flew Away, I think Alice hands down a profound and essential lesson for us all. A happy ending is never guaranteed, but what is guaranteed is our own ability to honor and elevate each other's humanity, to seek the light, and to make joy, even in a landscape crawling with wolves and goblins. When We Flew Away is a magnificent work of literature, and it's a tremendous contribution to our collective memory of the Holocaust in our time and for all time. In writing and researching the book, we partnered with the Anne Frank House. They vetted the novel to ensure that while much of the dialogue and inner monologue are imagined, every detail and historical element of the story is grounded in fact. Working with you, Alice, has been the greatest honor of my professional life. And our collaboration with the Anne Frank House was really instrumental. So it feels very fitting to be here on this occasion when the exhibit is here to help market with all of you. So I hope you'll all join me in welcoming Alice Hoffman to the stage.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I just wanted to say that we went and saw the exhibition today also, as all of you did. And I'm just so honored to be here. Working with you was an incredible dream for me. And it's a very emotional day to come and see this.
It was really emotional going through.
Yeah, and now I'm choking.
Not yet. Well, I wondered if you actually wanted to start by reading a passage from the book before we dive in.
And also, I wanted to just say this was a very different kind of writing for me and different kind of project for me because Scholastic came to me to ask me about doing the book, and Lisa and I worked really closely together, and I really feel like I could not have done it without her. It was really important to both of us that we got it right. I think when Scholastic came to me and said, do you want to do this book about Anne Frank? You'll see Anne Frank has been so meaningful for me personally in my life. I said yes without thinking. And I'm glad I said yes, but after I said yes, I thought, this is big. And it's a little scary. Also an honor, but also a little scary to take on this subject. So I'm just going to read just a little bit from the beginning of the book. I had to think of the way into the book, the way to tell the story. And sometimes, we've talked about this, the only way is to tell it in a mythic way, as if it was a fairy tale, because sometimes what's happening, how humans are behaving, is so unbelievable that to write about it in realistic terms is difficult. So this is the beginning of the book. There is a day you never forget, the day the whole world changes. When you close your eyes, light becomes dark, night never ends. Beasts walk freely down the street, stars fall from the sky. You were young 1 second, and then you were far too old. You lived years in minutes and decades in weeks. You wanted to travel. You wanted to grow up. You wanted to be beautiful. You wanted to fall in love. You wanted so much that your heart broke in half, but half a heart is better than none, and your heart is stronger than anyone would guess. You remember everything. You see the leaves turning green on the elm trees along the canals after the spring snow. Songbirds are rising up from the branches, and the bells over the bookstore doors are still ringing. There's a heron sitting on the balcony, a bird that's a sign of good luck. You're wearing 2 sweaters and a coat, even though the day is warm. When you see the black moths rising from deep underground, you can barely breathe. In this moment, you suddenly realize you may not always be with the ones you love. Something is happening all around you, and this is when you realize the story can change. And this is part 1, Little Sister, Amsterdam, May 1940. Once there were 2 sisters. One was beautiful and well-behaved, and one saw the future and stepped inside it. One planted a rose bush, but the other one noticed that every white flower was turning red. One did as she was told, but the other wrote down everything she had seen. When you write it down, they cannot pretend it never happened.
It gets me every time. So you employ a lot of very beautiful symbolism and sort of employ this imagery, animal imagery. Do you want to talk about some more about why you work that into the narrative, this fairy tale element?
Yeah, because I felt like I often feel this way. You know, growing up, I loved fairy tales, and it was really a surprise to me that Anne also loved fairy tales, and that her father invented fairy tales for her, and that she wrote a little book of fairy tales. That made me feel even closer to her. And I think one of the things about fairy tales for children is that they speak the truth in a way that a lot of stories don't. They get to really like the deepest heart of the matter. And I always felt that as a kid, that they weren't afraid to go dark and tell you the truth about the world. So I felt like the only way for me to try to write this story was in a similar way. So it's partially realistic, historical, but it's also has this other level of imagery and kind of a mythic feeling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it does help you sort of work in a lot of the very dark themes without being really overtly terrifying, because it was a terrifying time.
It was terrifying, and I wanted it to feel dark, but I also felt like when you just read the facts, they almost seem like unbelievable.
Right. Yeah. I wondered if you wanted to talk about how. So you mentioned, you know, when I first came to you and asked if you would be interested in writing this, you had told me that Anne Frank meant so much to you as a young person when you were a child, and you had read the diary. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. My first thought after I found out about the possibility of the book was, this is the book that my grandmother would have wanted me to write. This is it. Like, if I became a writer, I feel like this is the reason. Because Anne Frank meant so much to me and to her as well. Should I read a little bit about?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. In the afterward, I write a little bit about, you know, what Anne Frank meant to me personally. And so I'll just read a little bit of that. In the year when I was 12, I discovered many of the books that meant the most to me, the books that changed my life. I think this is true for many of us. At 12, we're becoming the adult readers we will be one day, and hopefully it's a time when we have the freedom to walk into a library or a bookstore and choose any book we wish to read. We can experiment with books, find the voices that speak to us, and see life all around us as something brand new. The book that affected me more than any other was The Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank. It changed the way I looked at the world. It changed the person I was and the person I would become. I read the diary in 1964. It was only 20 years after Anne Frank was murdered by the Nazis at Bergen-Belsen concentration camp, and yet I had heard very little about the Holocaust and the systematic genocide of the Jews in Europe. Looking back, I believe people in my family, New York Jews who had emigrated from Russia, wanted to look ahead to the future rather than remember the tragedies of the past, like so many other people who had come of age during World War II. My father never spoke about fighting at the front in France or the traumas he experienced there. The generation that had seen the atrocities of World War II wanted to protect their children from the reality of the brutality of war. These were the days when people who had cancer often preferred not to say the word aloud, instead calling the disease the big C, as if speaking about cancer might bring bad luck. Family secrets were kept secret, and children were protected from hard truths. Keep quiet about your problems and keep your grief to yourself. That's what we were told. It was a new world, and many people wanted to see the bright future they were hoping to create. But we know now that if you don't face the past, you are condemned to be haunted by it. We've learned that it's best to honor the past by remembering it and not to allow the horrific deeds of war to go unspoken, no matter how difficult it is to take in that knowledge. If we don't discuss the past, there are surely those who will take the opportunity to deny the truth and insist that it never happened in the first place. The remarkable book that I found at a book fair opened up a world of grief and sorrow I'd never been told about. And it also introduced me to the greatest first-person narrator in literature. For me, a working-class girl who had only read male writers in school, reading the Diary of a Young Girl was the first time that I realized that a young Jewish girl could be a writer. It was the book that made me want to become a writer, and it's highly unlikely that I would have ever imagined that as a possibility for myself had I not read it. A book belongs to its author, but it also belongs to its reader as well, and a book can mean many things to many people. For me, the Diary of a Young Girl illustrated and illuminated the desires of a girl who desperately wished to be a writer. Anne's voice spoke directly to me in a way that no author had before. Despite the cruel ending of her life at the age of 15, her diary helped me to see that even when there was evil in the world, even when it was impossible to have hope, it was still possible to be brave. It was possible not to be forgotten and to live on in what you had written. It was possible to have a dream.
So lovely. What did you find most meaningful in exploring the part of Anne's life that the book covers, the years before she goes into hiding?
Yeah, because I knew nothing about those years before, and I was really lucky to go to Amsterdam and to work with the researchers at the Anne Frank House, which was amazing and so fortunate. And then I got to kind of walk in her steps, to go to the house where she had lived before they went into hiding, to meet with a friend of hers. I felt like I was able to kind of feel what her world might have been like by walking in those steps. So that was, for me, a great journey to try to figure out what had happened before.
And what did you like? What is something you learned that you didn't know about her life or about what was happening in Amsterdam at that time?
Well, a couple of things, but one thing that really surprised me was that a lot of people had negative feelings about her, that she was difficult, that she was kind of full of herself, that she wanted to be the star of things, and that she alienated a lot of the other girls that she knew. So I felt like even more in common with her.
Yeah, she was so human.
I felt like she's so human. You know, she wasn't that perfect person that sometimes she's portrayed to be. She was real. And that was part of her dreams about coming to America. And, it was just, I felt like closer to her, knowing her flaws, really. And, very weirdly enough, as I was writing the book, I was renting this little cottage to work in. And it turned out that my landlord was a member of the Strauss family. And Nathan Strauss was a very good friend of Otto Frank's and tried very hard to get the family out and come to America, and failed, even though, they were very wealthy. They owned Macy's. They were friendly with the president's wife. And I just worked with someone who was very helpful at the Strauss Family Archives, and saw letters that had gone between the two of them, and realized, how hard they tried to get out. And the whole idea of immigrants being turned away, and that there was just no place for them to go. No place would take them.
Yeah. And I had never known until we were working on this book how close they came, and then just every door shut in their face.
Right.
And
they almost did it. And then there were some papers that during bombing were destroyed, and without those papers they couldn't go.
Right, in Rotterdam. Right?
Yeah, in another city. It wasn't Amsterdam.
Yeah. I wondered if you wanted to talk about your time in Amsterdam a little bit, and tell us a little bit more about what you saw there, and because I know you went to the house.
Well, I think going into the house was the most emotional part for me. And
the house where she lived.
The house where she lived beforehand. Because when she lived there, it was a very nice neighborhood filled with a lot of immigrants, but very nice, filled with children. And it still is that nice neighborhood. And so you heard children playing in this green. I think in the exhibition, there's a picture of the green. It's changed somewhat. It's kind of this green area that the apartment buildings are around it. And also we passed by, I didn't go into, I couldn't bring myself to, for some reason, the bookstore where the diary was bought. She saw it and asked her father for it. And but going into the house was very emotional. And I went with a friend, and we were asked if we wanted to stay in the house, because they allow writers who can't write in their own countries to come and live in the house and write. And I felt like I couldn't stay there. It was too emotional for me to stay there. So just going there and just being there was extremely intense experience. But the one part about it that was for me the most emotional is there's kind of a rooftop, and a flat rooftop. Mm-hmm. And there, we went out there, and there are photographs of Anne sitting there in kind of a lawn chair. And it just felt like the past was so close. It didn't feel very far away at all.
One of the things that strikes me when I read the book is how modern she feels, and it's totally, her life is really relatable.
Very much so. And when you see, when you go through this exhibition and you see the Hollywood photographs and the movie star photographs that are pinned to the wall, and that was kind of her dream. It's a very modern dream to have.
Yeah. She wanted to run away to Hollywood. And
me too.
What was the most surprising thing you learned as you did research?
Well, I felt that I didn't really understand what had happened in the Netherlands. I mean, they had the biggest percentage of Jews sent to concentration camps, not number-wise, but percentage-wise. And I think one of the reasons that happened is because the Dutch were so organized and so used to following rules. Mm-hmm. And so when they were asked to come down and sign their names and their addresses and the names of other children, they did so. So there was kind of an orderliness to it and following the rules, which is good to remember not to do that. And, how the Dutch people also responded in the same way to following the rules, to doing what they were told. And, that is really disturbing. And how, when something like this happens, it starts off really slow and then it's so fast and then you can't stop it.
Right. It really
snowballs. I have a little piece about that. Because, to talk about all the things that happened, I at the end of each chapter, there's a list, and it kind of tells the way things are taken away, and they're taken away before you even know what's happening, and then they're gone, and then your freedom is gone. So every chapter has a thing called What We Lost. So this follows one of the chapters. What we lost: our houses, our savings, our businesses were all taken away. We could own nothing, only our personal property, clothes and furniture, spoons and forks. We could not enter museums or libraries. not restaurants, not theaters or the zoo, or any public buildings, even markets that weren't meant specifically for Jews. Dogs were allowed to sit on park benches, but we were not. We were banned from cinemas and cafes. By the last day of May, we could no longer use swimming pools, parks, spas, or hotels. We could no longer own radios. There were signs we didn't want to read, but they all said the same thing: Jews not allowed. We could not go to their schools. Dutch children dressed in Nazi uniforms and marched through the streets. We gave our babies away so that they might have a chance to live. They came for us at any time. A knock on the door was all it took, and there weren't enough locks in the world to keep us safe. They said we were the problem. They said they had a solution, and that's when we knew that the time had come.
It's so haunting.
Yeah, and I do feel like it happened very slowly at first. So everybody adhered to the rules, and then it happened like kind of like a tidal wave, and everything was gone.
Yeah. I think upstairs in the exhibit, I saw there was a sign about how the girls, Anne and Margot, couldn't go ice skating, and fishing was prohibited, and it was really striking how these really like normal, ordinary, routine activities were taken away from them.
And I also, I went to Amsterdam. I went to Anne's school, Montessori school, and the classroom is there, and her desk is still there in the classroom, and the tree that was there when she was there is still there. And then Jews could no longer go to schools like that. They had to only go to Jewish schools. They couldn't go to schools with anybody else. And it is really haunting to think about how that happened so quickly.
Were you surprised when you learned about how the Dutch, obviously not all the Dutch people, but there was like a big Nazi party, and there was a lot of cooperation, if not collaboration or corroboration.
I was a
with the
little
Nazis.
surprised, but I had written another book called The Dove Keepers about Israel and Masada, and I had gone to Amsterdam once and met with I don't know if I told you this, met with like 20 Holocaust survivors, Jewish women, and they were very embittered. And they felt that the Dutch's behavior was terrible. And I think that's one of the things about the Anne Frank House. It's a way to say, this is what we did, this is what happened, and to, kind of take onus for what happened in the Netherlands. I was surprised. I was also surprised that a lot of people felt like, why Anne Frank? Which I don't think we feel here in the States, but why Anne Frank? There were so many other people, which is true, who were in hiding, who were young, and so many other people who wrote diaries. And I met with actually a scholar there who was studying where teenagers were hidden and how many diaries there were. But the thing about Anne's diary that makes a difference is that it rises to the level of great literature because she's such a good writer.
Yeah, and she has that voice that is just, it's so unique and it's so alive on the page.
Right. She's so alive, you feel like you know her. And I think that happened to me when I first read it when I was 12. I felt like I knew her. And that's the great thing about writing. That's why I always feel like they want to ban books, because when you read a book and it's a powerful book, you can feel such compassion for somebody in a way that nothing else does that really, but books.
I agree. What was the most challenging aspect of writing about Anne Frank or this time period for you?
Well, I think it was something that made you have to do a lot of work, because we checked and checked and checked to make sure everything was historically correct. And you were great at that. And I'm not so good at that. And basically there were kind of two outlines, kind of the emotional arcs and then the actual historical facts. So they had to blend together. That was the most difficult part.
Do you want to talk about that process a little bit, how you got those two arcs to mesh? And
I don't know.
how
It was
we
like a
went.
miracle.
It's magic.
I think it was going over it with you. I don't even remember it, because when I'm writing, I'm in another state of consciousness or something. But I just remember I would plot out the history, and often I would get it wrong. But I would plot out the history, and then I would think about what is the story behind this history. Because writing historical fiction is in a way like writing a mystery, because there's so much missing. You don't know what people said to each other. You don't know what they really felt unless they write it down. But you don't know where they went. They don't write down those small details. So a lot of it you have to invent, but you want it to mesh with the factual. So that was difficult.
You did a magnificent job of that.
Well, you went over it so many times. I don't think people usually do that. And then the Anne Frank house went over it so many times.
They were great.
And caught anything that was the slightest error.
Yeah, we did go back and forth quite a bit.
A lot.
And we're really trying to be so careful. And there was a sense of real responsibility.
It is a huge responsibility. And there may be a mistake or two, I don't know, but not for the lack of trying to make everything right.
Yeah. What part of writing this book did you love or enjoy the most?
Well, I think part of it was going to Amsterdam. I think that was doing the research there was really kind of an amazing once in a lifetime experience. I felt so lucky and so fortunate to be able to do that. But, I was scared to write it because I knew that I couldn't write it in first person, because she's like the greatest first person narration. And usually when I write about younger people, I like to write from inside of them, and I couldn't do that. So that was a little daunting, but I just had to kind of figure out a way to be close to her without being her.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that writing the fairy tale did that let you find a way into her voice, or is it the other way around? Did you have her voice and then decide to employ the fairy tale aspects?
They both kind of arose at the same time. And the fact that she loved fairy tales and wrote fairy tales, and I read some of the fairy tales that she wrote, made it easier for me, made me feel like this is the right way to tell the story.
Mm-hmm. Did your sense of Anne change as you researched and wrote the book?
Yeah, I mean, like I was saying, I didn't see her as perfect anymore. I saw her as more human. I thought it was really interesting that she seemed to be her father's favorite, and that their connection was through literature and books and fairy tales. And that seemed very special to me. And I think she kind of carried that with her. She felt like she was special, and she was. Yeah. But she was also ordinary. That's the weird thing.
You wrote so beautifully about her relationships with her sister and both of her parents. I think anyone who's read the diary knows she had a very fraught relationship with her mother. And I thought you portrayed that really elegantly, walked a line between, I think, staying true to what we know about the relationship and also, being kind to both characters. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, with her sister, who was kind of the perfect one, I had a brother who was the perfect one. So it wasn't that hard for me to think about what that dynamic might have been like. And with her mother, I felt like, her mother was a difficult person. And Anne had been told by relatives that it was not a love match. And I think that was an important thing as a family, that they were very close, but it was not so much of a happy marriage.
Sometimes in hindsight, it's easy to judge other people's decisions, especially when they have terrible consequences. Yeah. And you treat Otto Frank with so much love and care and compassion. And I found that also very moving. And I just, I know in the book, I think it's hinted at that he's questioning his decision to have moved to the Netherlands and then to stay there for as long as they did. Do you feel like I don't know. Can you talk about that?
Yeah.
And
Well, I wrote another book called The World That We Knew, which was about children who were sent away to France by their parents. And I met a lot of survivors who had been in these schools and these kind of, not just schools, but they were, I don't know what they were, but I visited the schools also, but who never saw their parents again. So mostly they were sent away from Germany. And that was a very brave thing to do, to send your children away so that they might live even if you never saw them again. I don't think Otto Frank could bring himself to do that. And whether it would have worked or not, who knows? But at one point, there was a possibility of the girls going to England, where had some relatives, and then that quickly closed down. But either way, it's so hard to know as a parent what you would do at that point. Maybe I think he felt that they would be safer if they were hidden and they stayed together. A gentleman that I became friendly with, whose mother sent him to France, he and his brother, I think they were something like 5 and 7. And he still had the suitcase with all of the things that she sent them with and the letters that she sent to him. And, he wound up going to Harvard and Harvard Law School and having a great family and a great life. But to be able to do that, is just a heartbreaking decision. I don't know what I would have done in those circumstances.
It's an unimaginable choice to be faced with. I hadn't known about their attempts to get to America and their Otto's correspondence with Nathan Strauss. Was that an aspect you had known about before you became involved with the Strauss Family Archive?
Yeah, I was surprised. I had no idea that they were friends or knew each other. I didn't know anything about that connection. And I felt like, if Nathan Strauss, who was so powerful and was like friendly with Eleanor Roosevelt, couldn't get him out, then that just shows how incredibly difficult it was to get somebody out. They had gone to college together in Germany, and then Otto Frank had come to New York and had worked, I don't know if at Macy's, had worked something to do with the Strauss family. And, I just think, what if he had stayed here, but he went back when his father died. It was just all those moments in life where you make a decision and you don't know what your fate will be.
Yeah. I think we're coming to an end, but I just wanted to ask you one more question. What do you think is the lasting impact of Anne Frank's legacy and her story? And what do you hope readers will take away from reading When We Flew Away?
I felt like writing this book. I wrote it because I felt like I wanted someone to finish reading this and then read the diary. Like I wanted it to be kind of like a portal to the diary. So that was my thought about it. I think, the whole idea that, if you write it down, unless you burn the book, and even then, there are people who will remember the book, you can't be forgotten, and people can't say it never happened. Yeah. Or they can say it, but that's not true.
That's not the truth. Yeah.
And thank you for everything, Lisa.
Thank you, Alice. Thank you. So now we can take some questions from the audience. Yes. Oh, I think they have a mic.
I think they have a.
Yeah.
10, but I'll just ask one. Do you think, just your opinion from all the research and everything, do you think had she been in the camp and had access to writing materials, which I imagine she didn't, she would have kept writing? Or is there a possibility there was something written that was never found?
Well, from what I've heard, research-wise, she was so sick there would be no possible way. They were terribly ill, and oh God, I'm now blocking the disease they died from.
Typhus.
Typhus. Thank you. And there was somebody who they had known in Amsterdam who said that she had seen them together, the two sisters. They were always together. They slept together. They were always together. I think it was way beyond being able to write, but you never know.
It's a young adult novel. Over here.
Oh, thank you.
It was published as a young adult novel. What were the feedback that you've gotten from the young adults? Had most of them known of Anne Frank, read the diary previously, or was this their first exposure?
Well, all I can say is that when I started, this is another reason why I said yes. I had a niece who lives in Vienna, and she was about 12 or 13 at the time. And I said, I think I'm going to write a book about Anne Frank. And she said, who's Anne Frank? So I think there's a certain time when sometimes kids learn about this, but it's later, and I don't really know if it's being taught in schools. So I don't really know. Some, but I feel like even if I don't get the feedback, if they read it, it's something they didn't necessarily know. And it just kind of opens up that period of time for them, and maybe opens up the diary to them. Whether or not the diary is being read in school, I don't know.
I had a question. PBS recently reran Ken Burns' America and the Holocaust, and there was an interview with one of the helpers that worked with the Franks today, and she said it was her total belief that if Anne had survived the camps, she never would have said, despite all I have seen, I believe that people are fundamentally good. And you lived with her.
Yeah.
When I went through the exhibition, I thought the opposite, but what's your thought?
That's so interesting that you bring that up, because when I started writing, I didn't reread the diary because I felt like I had to come from a place of not knowing. And some of these things that she said, came from a place of not knowing. I think it was kind of her inner self. But so when we wanted to put a quote in of Anne's at the beginning of this book. I hope it's here. Let me see if I can find it. It wasn't that one, because I think that one can be taken out of context and out of time. So this is the one that I used. How wonderful it is that no one has to wait even a minute to start gradually changing the world. And I think that's something she probably still would have believed. And I think it's a stronger message, especially for kids. So.
Hi. I love your writing, by the way. I read everything you write. I'm an English language arts teacher, and I teach at a very unique school. In fact, I'm the only Jewish teacher in the school, and all of my students are either Christian or Muslim or Buddhist. And I teach 7th and 8th grade, and going into 8th grade, the students do read the Diary of Anne Frank. And then when they come back to school, they do an Anne Frank project. So when I saw that you had written this, I couldn't wait to read it. I also run the library league at my school, and so I have a lot of my 8th grade students in there, and I've been reading pieces to them from this. I will say it's uncomfortable at this point in history to be in that position. And I was just wondering, in terms of also if any feedback that you have received from perhaps other middle school teachers about how they might consider using this book in class. I will take it back tomorrow to school. I'm hoping you will sign it. And I keep reading little passages from it, and I'll talk to them about what you've been sharing in terms of the writing process and the research, because we are doing historical fiction. And since many are coming from immigrant families, they were plotting their own fictionalized story of their families as well.
That's great.
So we'll see how that goes as well.
That's great. Well, thank you so much. I mean, kudos to you for teaching 7th and 8th graders, the most interesting and the most difficult people. I do think that's around the time when your reading life is formed and you find the books that are the most important to you. And I think it's great that you're doing these projects.
We're very concerned right now. We've been doing a project in the Library League with banned books. And I have a feeling that this book will be banned in certain middle and high school libraries.
Yeah.
When I learned today that Amanda Gorman's poem has been banned in certain southern states. So it's a challenging time to teach and let my students know that they will maybe interface later in their lives with individuals who have not had the same exposure
Yeah.
to literature that they have, and it will change them as people.
Well, I think that's such an important issue right now is banned books, and it will become more and more important as time goes on. I mean, I have to say, sometimes books, you read the future in books. I mean, my other favorite writer is Ray Bradbury. And so Fahrenheit 451 is like so telling you the future and telling you how important books are. But anyway, I think what you're doing is great. I don't really interface that much with kids. I'm mostly locked in a room writing. So, but I think from the kids I know, I think reading just opens the whole world. So, thank you very much for everything you do. Thank you.
You're one of my favorite writers as well. I'm an attorney, and I also have a background in the arts.
I can't hear.
Sorry.
For some.
You're one of my favorite writers as well. I'm an attorney, and I have a background in the arts, which is sort of a complicated marriage, for lack of a better way to put it at times. As we move into a time where censorship and banned books are on the uptick, how do we continue to find our creative voices where every time sometimes certain individuals speak out in certain circles, we end up facing what we recognize as the beginning of patterns from the 20s and 30s and even so just wondering, also, you mentioned The World That We Knew. I read it at the beginning of the pandemic. It was sort of it's like kind of a history rhyming or being somewhat prophetic now in terms of the world that we're living in post-pandemic, where people don't almost want to acknowledge the drastic impact that that's had on everything and then the shifts in the climate that we're in.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I don't know, Lisa, do you want to speak to this? Because Scholastic does a lot of work about banned books, and I think publishers are trying to do their best about it. It's difficult.
And book publishers, the American Library Association are all doing a lot of work to try to fight banned books.
Yeah. Oh.
Yes.
Right.
Oh, sorry. I also love your books. I love the magic in them.
Thank you.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what you read about Anne Frank's fairy tales and how your fairy tale aspect might have fit into the book, and if we use some of her images in the fairy tale aspect of this book.
Yeah, thank you. I didn't use her images. Her fairy tales were kind of more traditional, but very interesting, and it just made me feel kind of closer to her. And I didn't really use anything that she wrote within this because I just didn't feel like I could do that. That it would be the right thing to do. But thank you so much. Thank you.
Hi, as a young adult, I was just wondering what did you want people like me to take away from this book? As someone who loves reading about Anne Frank and loves this kind of these kind of books, I was wondering, what do you want kids to learn from this, and what do you want them to take away? Because I was just wondering that.
Well, thank you. That's a great question.
That's a great question.
I think what I really wanted them to take away, or you to take away, is to kind of know the beginning of Anne's story and to feel like maybe you would want to read the diary and think about the things that she had to think about and that I had to think about what happens when you follow the rules. I'm sorry to say that you have to really think about what's going on and kind of act up, if you feel like it's going in the wrong direction. And so, and that books are so important, which I know they are for you. So thank you.
There's one in the back.
Hi. One of my favorite books of yours is At Risk, about the girl who develops AIDS as a result of a transfusion. And I don't know if there was any connection. It felt that was also about a town processing a whole event, like the whole AIDS epidemic. And I'm just wondering if you were thinking at all about this book, your book, At Risk, when you embarked on the book of Anne Frank.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. I have trouble hearing, so I didn't hear all of it, but I heard some of it. And so in talking about At Risk, which I wrote at the beginning of the AIDS epidemic, and
And a connection to this one?
any connection to this one? Well, the book is really about, I wrote the book, believe it or not, while I was pregnant. And I think because I was thinking about how when you have children, you never see the world in the same way afterwards. You always have to think of danger and think of possibilities. And it just, it's a different step. You become someone else. You become somebody who's always has to take care of somebody forever. And so in that way, I think there are similarities. I think, the whole idea about Anne's mother is that she didn't show her emotions, but that didn't mean she didn't have them. And so there's a lot of references to the underworld and Demeter and Persephone, and what would her mother be willing to do for her? So I think it's something, that we all kind of struggle with and think about. And thank you. I appreciate that.
Hi there. I can't wait to read this book. I'm thinking that when you researched and wrote this book, you could not have anticipated our current political situation, including the ICE roundups. So I'm wondering, within this contemporary context, how you might view your book being read, especially within immigrant communities, where this fear is ever present, and how they might relate to Anne and, I don't take meaning perhaps from her.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I didn't know what would happen in our country or what would happen politically. I had no idea, but I think there's always a reason to be watchful and wary and protect democracy, or things like this can happen. There can be the rise of fascism anywhere, anytime. I didn't think about it as much when I was writing the book as I do now. And I feel like, it's really a warning, and Anne Frank's diary is really a warning about, not just closing your eyes to what's happening around you.
I find that it's very pressing that you wrote this book and that it came to fruition at this time. And I think that you really should, and it really should be publicized, not just for a young adult audience, but I think it should be blasted across our country and internationally, because I think it is a wake-up call for young people and for their parents and for the grandparents. And I really think that we really need to spread it around. Don't keep it silent. You're not locally, but I really, really, really want to see it broadcast.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
I will say it is being published. It has been published in the UK, in Australia and New Zealand, and the Netherlands. Yeah.
And also, I'm not going to let Lisa hear this, but whenever I write for young people, I'm not really writing for young people. I'm really writing for myself at the age of 16, which is my psychic age. And I just feel like I'm writing for adults as well within the children's book.
I have a question about your process. I confess I have not yet read the book. I generally avoid reading Holocaust literature, a habit inculcated in me by my mother, who is the daughter of concentration camp survivors. A little too close to home, even 2 generations later sometimes. But when you mentioned that you wrote this with sort of a fairy tale technique. It immediately put me in mind of one of the books I read many years ago, Briar Rose by Jane Yolen. I don't know if you're...
Wait, can you say that again?
Briar Rose by Jane Yolen.
I love Jane Yolen, yeah.
So I think she published it, I think in 1992. And around the time I think you published Turtle Moon, which was the first book of yours that I read. I'm from Great Neck, so I loved it.
Thank you.
But that too tells the story of a Holocaust survival story through fairy tale. Sleeping Beauty specifically. Yeah. And so I wondered in your process, if you make any effort to read authors, read books that kind of utilize a similar technique to what you anticipate, or if you stay away from it in order to be original.
I stay away. I'm watching what is that English cooking show? That's what I'm doing, because I don't want to. If I read someone else's book, a novel especially, it might somehow infiltrate the way I think about things, and I don't really want that. So I feel like the books that influenced me really are the books that I read when I was a kid, when I was a teenager, when I was just starting to be a writer, more so than any others, really. So I kind of, if something is about a topic that I tend to write about, I kind of avoid it. But thank you very much.
Any more questions? Oh, in the back.
I'm sorry if this question may have already been asked, but I remember in the past you talked about working with the writers group as part of your process. I'm just wondering if that's still part of your process.
A writers group? I was in a writers group for a long time, but we didn't talk about our work. We more got together to complain about things. So, it's very hard for me to talk about my work before it's completely done, because it's going to change, and because somebody could have a negative reaction that would impact me or whatever. I tend to not do that. But but I think it was a good idea for me when I was younger, when I went to a writing program, and that was great. So I think a lot of times taking a writing class or being in a community, if you want to get writing, that kind of gets you to start.
Any more questions? All right. I think
we're done. Thank you. And thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Alice.